How is it that you exist? I'm talking about you specifically, not other people. Someone else existing makes sense. From your perspective, someone else could be anyone. Doesn't matter who is experiencing someone else's reality for them to exist. But for you to exist, it had to be exactly you that emerged in your body. And the odds of that happening are so incredibly unlikely, it might as well be impossible. Before I explain why you shouldn't exist, let me propose a simple axiom. You cannot experience more than one body. This means if an exact clone of you, with your exact arrangement of atoms, takes a cold shower, you're not going to experience their pain. If this axiom is not true, then reality is way more bizarre than I can imagine. Now, let's begin imagining the statistical impossibility of you. For you to exist, your conception had to be exactly what it was. If nearly identical genetics had replaced your own at conception, and that person went on to live your exact life, that person would not be you. That would be a sibling to the you that would never exist. And if a nearly identical sibling isn't you, surely the offspring of any other combination of parents wouldn't be you either. The question is, what are the odds that everything in history happened in such a way to lead to your existence? Not to your identical sibling's existence, mind you, but specifically to your existence. Although I can't calculate the exact odds of you existing, I think it's safe to assume that, on each day before you existed, there was at least a 50% chance of something different happening that would lead to a reality where you don't exist. Those odds are equivalent to flipping heads on a coin every day for 13.7 billion years, which is roughly 5 trillion days. This makes the odds of you existing, and we are being very generous here, 1 in 5 trillion factorial. What does 5 trillion factorial look like? Well, I can't show you because 5 trillion factorial is a number longer than 5 trillion digits. Much longer. I know it's hard to imagine a number like that, so for perspective, the odds of randomly selecting a specific atom out of all the atoms in the observable universe is a number you can write down. We could stop the video here. It's already impossibly unlikely that you exist, but we have something else even more unlikely to consider. Imagine reality is infinite. Infinite in such a way that it contains infinite copies of our universe, precisely as it is now. Of course, within each copy, there is a person you'd recognize as yourself without even the slightest distinction. However, assuming that one-body axiom I mentioned is true, none of those yous would be you. Otherwise, you'd experience their experiences. This means, if reality was infinite, and something different happened in this timeline causing you not to exist, it doesn't matter what happens in the infinite future or in any other infinite timelines. You would just never exist, period, making the odds of you existing 1 in infinity. And if reality was not infinite, that can only reduce the opportunities for you to exist. Which means the only thing more unlikely than you existing is something that's impossible. All this to say, your existence is so impossibly unlikely that it may be more likely I'm working with a faulty conceptualization of reality. That conceptualization being the same conceptualization most people seem to have. That is, I based everything in this video on the premise that reality is one singular timeline composed of apparently random events that somehow managed to converge to your existence, against all the odds. Now, although I'm not outright dismissing this conceptualization of reality, perhaps we can explore alternative ways to conceptualize reality. Ways that make the odds of you existing not so impossibly unlikely. This list is by no means exhaustive, but here are some of those alternative ways to conceptualize reality that I can imagine. 1. Reality isn't random as it may seem. It is deterministic. History could not have played out differently because there was only ever one determined path in the universe. Essentially, you are somehow always destined to exist. 2. Reality is not one singular timeline of events. It diverges at every possibility, meaning there's a sort of multiverse reality going on here. So it's not that everything before your conception had to happen exactly as it did for you to exist. Rather, it's simply that everything happened, which includes you, for some reason. 3. Reality truly is a random soup of chaos and disorder. However, you aren't what you think you are. You think of yourself as an individual, one sentience that spontaneously popped into existence out of nothing. But is your body one individual atom that spontaneously popped into existence? Obviously not. Your body is an amalgamation of already existing atoms. Similarly, you aren't one individual sentience. You are an amalgamation of already existing sentiences. And just like the atoms that compose your body, all the sentiences composing you will continue existing in other forms long after you're gone. 4. Reality really is nothing more than a bunch of sterile atoms, and you don't actually exist. Although you may think that you are experiencing this video right now, you actually aren't. That sense of experience is really just an illusionary byproduct of evolution, which naturally selected a system of atoms that would preserve itself longer than competing systems. And what better incentive is there to survive than for a pile of atoms to act as if it experiences life? So, since you don't actually exist, you can stop thinking that you do now. Seriously, stop it. 5. The final way to conceptualize reality and your existence is this. Someone will eventually figure it all out, they will explain it all very simply in a 2-minute YouTube video, and everyone will be like, okay, that makes sense. Then we'll all move on with our lives, never to speak of this topic again. Whatever happens to be the accurate conceptualization, I think the mere fact that you exist shows us something interesting about reality. If I was a non-sentient supercomputer, I'd probably conclude that reality is just a bunch of sterile atoms bouncing around, along with all that other sterile stuff in the universe. The idea that a pile of atoms can actually have subjective experiences would seem like nothing more than nonsensical magical pseudoscience. Ironically, that nonsensical magical pseudoscience is the only thing you can be sure is true. Even if you discover reality is a fake simulation and atoms as we understand them don't exist, it would still be true that you are an experiencer experiencing experiences. This is true regardless of the underlying reality. Probably. It's probably true. It's the most true thing you can get. Which brings me to my point I find interesting. If a bunch of sterile atoms floating around the universe isn't the full picture of reality, as it may seem to a supercomputer, is the full picture of reality a bunch of sentient infused atoms floating around, as it may seem to us? Or could there be more nonsensical magical pseudoscience that we don't understand about reality? I'll save that for another video, not this one. All right, goodbye everybody.